Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has interacted with students at the Nanyang Technological University on the ways that technology can change our lives. Now, the interaction came after several memorandums of understanding were signed between the Indian universities and also the Nanyang University. And also earlier, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi issued a joint statement with his Singaporean counterpart after signing a number of memorandums of understanding. Now, the Indian Prime Minister and also the Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong held extensive bilateral talks. The two countries also inked a number of pacts in the areas of defence, space and skill development. The navies of both nations signed an agreement for joint naval exercises. India and Singapore successfully have concluded the second review of the bilateral comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. Notably, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that cybersecurity and terrorism were amongst the key areas of focus. All right, now for more on this, we are joined in by our political affairs editor, Karthikeya Sharma, who is presently in Singapore and is tracking all the developments very closely for us. Good afternoon to you, Karthikeya. This, of course, is a very significant visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We saw him interacting there with the students of the university in Singapore. Now, what is a big takeaway that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has got when he specifically has been highlighting the extent of cooperation, which he says that he would like to expand with nations of Southeast Asia?
Absolutely. You see, the importance of the fact that the Prime Minister is going to be there at a time when a lot of things are happening in the region, one can only imagine that there will be substantive in his speech. But right now, I'm joined by Dr. William Choom, a senior fellow and a person who over a period of time has actually helped Shangri-La Dialogue to evolve, and he helps run it. So he plays a very crucial role, not only in terms of the policy, not only in terms of paper research, but in terms of making it function. So thank you for joining me on WION. Prime Minister Modi has been invited. What sort of speech is the international community expecting from India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, essentially, the international community as well as the regional states here are expecting Prime Minister Modi to come out really strong with tangible policy suggestions on how New Delhi intends to act upon its Act East policy, how India will engage not only with Singapore, but ASEAN and across the rest of countries in the Indo-Pacific. I think there has to be a clear message about Indian commitment and the sustainability of Indian commitment to the region, especially when it comes to what are essentially shared principles: rule of law, peace and prosperity, free trade agreements, global regional alliances and partnerships that we have seen so much of in this region.
There are two Asian issues which have, dominating the world headline. I'll come to you after some time. You spoke about commitment. I think Indian Prime Minister and the Indian foreign policy from Look East, it has become Act East. So what sort of commitment does Singapore or Indonesia or Philippines or Vietnam think India should give in terms of its engagement with East, with whom it now has 70% of its trade?
Yeah, absolutely. I think trade, prosperity, stability are essentially kind of buzzwords that we hear in this part of the world. So I think one key plank of that is to have India work with ASEAN and the other 5 countries that are involved in the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, pushing that through, given that President Donald Trump has already withdrawn from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The impetus is actually on India and the other countries involved in RCEP to push this ahead as kind of another plank, another building block towards a free trade area across the Pacific. In terms of defense and security, we would like to see kind of Indian ships plying, and asserting freedom of navigation rights across the global commons that are present in the South China Sea, in East China Sea, and of course the Indian Ocean, working with kind of states in the Indo-Pacific to assert this kind of freedom of navigation and overflight, which you can see has been increasingly challenged in recent years. Are you saying
that there's a vacuum which India can fill after American exit?
Well, I wouldn't say that Americans have exited. I think the Americans are still in the region, albeit in a kind of a different format, in a different mode. But what I'm saying is that any kind of substantive Indian involvements in terms of defense relationships, defense diplomacy, regional diplomacy, it adds to the mix. It's free market economics. If you want stability in prices, in a sense, you got to have multiple companies involved in the mix. You have multiple countries involved in the geopolitical mix. Then you get stability, because there's a multiple powers pulling at the same pole. That causes stability to burst out across the region.
Mr. Chung, this is an Asian century. When I say Asian century, I mean that, there's a rise of China, there is presence of India, and you have the most problematic issue, which is North Korea, and then you have an American engagement on that. So can we say that these are the three defining issues right now?
Yeah, I would think so. If you've been to enough Shangri-La dialogues, you will know that the Sino-American relationship and the interactions and exchanges, sometimes very robust exchanges between the Americans and Chinese, they always happen in the island ballroom right behind us. And so that will be a major theme. The second theme is, of course, the Trump-Kim summit that will happen in this country in another 10 days' time. And that will be widely watched. And I think you have defense secretaries and defense ministers coming up very strongly about how they want to see the deal being signed off between President Trump and Mr. Kim Jong-un. So that would be a major topic.
You spoke about the robust Sino-American dialogue. But when we talk about Sino-American dialogue, it is seen in the context of trade and assertion of one of their military, digital and space technology. But if you see it from the context of Asia, then it becomes the Spratly Island dispute, then it becomes South China Sea, then it becomes another Doklam, which means it causes a lot of anxiety to many nations.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I think there's a shared concern in this part of the world. There's a saying here.
Is that a concern?
Absolutely. When there's Sino-American contentions, especially over the paracels, the Spratlys, the South China Sea, it causes concern, because essentially regional states depend on this very vital maritime waterway for trade. It's their lifeblood. So if there's any kind of tensions, if there's any kind of conflict or confrontation between the United States and China, it causes concern all around. So
even Doklam continues in a different avatar today, and you have a continuous anxiety over Spratly Island and the South China Sea, shared specifically by Indonesia, Vietnam and Philippines, even if you leave aside Japan and Taiwan issue.
Yes, I would think so. Yes, it is a serious issue, because it has the potential, if there is a potential for Sino-American confrontation, even, shots fired in anger, it will be in the South China Sea. Because I do not see kind of a Sino-American confrontation over the Korean Peninsula. I think even though on the peninsula, both the China and the US have slightly different views, or even markedly different views, both sides are actually keen on working on, achieving that peace and stability. They see eye to eye on it, but not quite the South China Sea, because the South China Sea is a really different animal with many different layers of complexity.
Mr. Chung, how do you see the initiative taken by the Indian Prime Minister for bilaterals which are completely informal, without any pressure of a statement or communique, which he had with the Chinese Premier in Wuhan, with Vladimir Putin in Sochi, and a short one at Santiniketan in West Bengal with Sheikh Hasina? How do you see the initiative of Prime Minister Modi in this context?
Well, I think it's the Asian way, right? It's the Asian way. The Asian way is having a face-to-face shinwag, a chat, informal, no aids, no interpreters, but just having a P2P, person-to-person kind of exchanges. That's very Asian. I think that's something that even people outside Asia can actually learn, that a relationship is more than just a black and white document, it's more than just a communique, it's more than just a treaty, but it's about, heads of countries, heads of government coming together to actually talk about the issues at a very intimate level, which is actually something that we saw between North and South Korea about a few weeks ago, between President Moon and Kim Jong-un again.
And lastly, before I let go of you, today is the day when the keynote address is given. Do you expect that the Prime Minister Modi will touch upon the issue of South China Sea and other contention, where his effort in past 35 days has been to build bridges all across, to treat multipolarity as cooperative principles rather than competing ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if Prime Minister Modi actually mentions the South China Sea, I suspect, I don't have a copy of his speech, of course, but I suspect that he will mention high principles. When there are contentions, when there are disagreements, two sides should be able to recognize that both of us have shared principles. And what are the shared principles? The shared principles are prosperity, continued trade, maintenance of the freedom of the global commons, as well as maritime security, rule of law, and restrain from force in the resolution of disputes. I think that if Prime Minister Modi were to frame it like that, everyone agrees on these high principles, then that's probably a clever and sophisticated way of approaching the South China Sea issue.
Mr. Chung, thank you for making time for WION.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So Mr. Chung, one of the principal organizers, a person who has seen this dialogue grow over a period of time, says that there's certain issues which dominate, but this time around they will be very keen to hear as to what Prime Minister Modi has to say when it comes to South China Sea, or when it comes to the complementarity or reciprocity between places like Singapore, ASEAN and other issues.
Absolutely indeed. Karthikeya, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Singapore and getting us these interesting insights as to what could be expected in the keynote address that will be given by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in some time from now. We'll of course come back to you as soon as we have more details.